Welcome everybody to Clearwater Jazz Holidays Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions. Today's educators and guest musicians are James Suggs and Dwayne White. And I'm going to try to give this topic some justice right now, but I bet Dwayne can do it better than me. So here's their topic for today. And they played that?
That was pretty good, Steve.
All right, it's effectively covering your favorite solos, but maybe Dwayne can have another shot at that. I want to hear you say it, Dwayne.
You know what? You did a much better job than I could do.
All right.
And they played that.
There it is.
We are recording these sessions for the purposes of Clearwater Jazz Holiday education and outreach. Everybody's muted for the courtesy of these sessions, but if you have questions, you can use the chat feature or the raise your hand feature. We'll get those questions to James and to Dwayne. And if you have feedback, please send us that feedback to info@clearwaterjazz.com or suggested topics for future sessions. We've got so many great musicians working with us on these sessions, and if you have something you'd like for us to cover that we haven't covered, we can certainly try to do that. We have a couple new resources available with these virtual sessions. From the Jazz Holidays Education and Outreach page, you can now access what's called the Studio, which archives all of the full recorded sessions organized by instrument, and there are some that are just classified as general topics, which are really great, including one that Dwayne and James have done previously together, which is called Why Listening to Music is Important. So definitely try to check that one out. You can also listen to all of these videos at the Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions podcast. There's a link from the studio to the podcast, and it's available on a lot of different platforms, including Apple Music and Spotify, wherever you stream your podcast. So check that out. It's another great way to enjoy these sessions. Those are brought to you. The studio is brought to you by Blue Water Wealth Management Group at Steward Partners, and the podcast is brought to us by our friends at Marine Max. And of course, we thank the Al Downing Tampa Bay Jazz Association. I see James or Dwayne is kicking a Al Downing shirt today.
Yes, sir, I am.
Nice. We thank Al Downing for helping us to expand the reach of these sessions as part of this program. Thank you, Al Downing. And let me tell you a little bit about James and Dwayne and then turn it over to them. James is a professional trumpet player currently living in St. Petersburg after spending 8 years living and playing in Argentina. James's resume is long and impressive. He started playing trumpet at the age of 9, and since that time, his talents have taken him all over the world. He received a master's degree in music jazz performance from the University of South Florida and also serves as an adjunct professor there. Dwayne is a professional trumpeter and music educator. Dwayne moved to Tampa, Florida in 1996 to begin a career as a music educator. He served as a music specialist at Lanier Elementary School, where his colleagues selected him as Teacher of the Year 2004-2005. Dwayne currently works as a counselor with the Tampa YMCA Youth Development. He's also active in several arts organizations, including the Al Downing Tampa Bay Jazz Association, where he serves as chairman of the Education and Scholarship Committee. He plays with several groups throughout the area and organizes some jazz jams that have typically taken place at the Hangar restaurant on Monday nights in St. Pete, and more recently, virtual sessions he's been doing in connection with Al Downing Tampa Bay Jazz Association. Both James and Dwayne are very active too with Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation's education and outreach programs. If you'd like to connect with both of them, you can hit them up in their social media channels, or perhaps they'll share with you some other information today to connect with them, as they love connecting with people to talk music and also about music lessons. So Dwayne and James, welcome back to Clearwater Jazz Holidays Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions. The stage is all yours.
Yeah, Thank you so much, Steve. James, good to see you again, my man.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this, man.
Yeah, this is gonna be cool, man. You know, I'm thinking of the topic, and they played this. We did the last session that we did was why listening is important, and we covered a lot of ground in that session. But one of the things that I thought of was, what are some things that kind of speak to me when I listen for things? What are some things that I listen for, and some things that kind of speak to me more than others? And I thought this would be a cool session to do that.
Yeah.
What about you, James?
Yeah, I completely agree. And you know, when you sent me your list today of the tunes and the solos and the soloists that you loved through the years, and I was impressed, but also there were a few that we completely agreed on and that were in the back of my mind and have been for a while. So it's cool. It's not that big of a surprise because I respect you as a player and your knowledge of jazz. So of course there's going to be some overlapping, but there were a couple that were like good surprises that I didn't expect you to come up with.
Yeah, same with your list when you sent me your list as well. Again, same thing. I knew there were some things some players that we would have in common.
Yeah.
Just from knowing you as a player and listening to you as a player. But there were a couple of things that on that list that I was not aware of at all.
You know what I was thinking about? Sorry to cut you off. You know what I was thinking about was, going through, just thinking about those classic memorable solos in my mind that I've listened to so many times. I realized that a lot of them are hard to get a hold of. You might be able to find them bootlegged on YouTube or here and there, but like for instance on Spotify, to make a Spotify playlist, it was kind of hard to find some of the solos that I wanted because there are these live, like one night only crazy, who knows what happened that night, those kind of things.
Exactly. I had exactly the same issue. There were a couple that the solos, most of the solos that I chose for the list are solos that when I was really becoming serious about a player in my formative years, they're solos that people directed me to, said, hey man, you should check this out. So those are the solos that still stick with me today, most of them. So some of those solos, the same thing, they're not readily available. And you know what, James, before we go too much further, I'm going to say this. There is, I think, I was thinking about this before the session started. The best way to get the most from this session, you can, if you view this session immediately after, or even while you're doing it, if you view it again, go and listen to those examples, those recorded examples. Yep. That's the way to get the most out of this session.
I agree. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a way to kind of, when we mention certain things about, intricacies and things about the nuances about those solos and those musicians, you can go and listen to them exactly at that time and see what we're talking about. And also, I think we're talking about overlapping and things in common. I think a lot of these solos that we're going to talk about have a lot in common, a lot of nuances, a lot of stylistic characteristics that they have a lot in common. But there are also those specific differences that each of them have that I think make them, really special and will stand out, for the rest of history, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. There's again, there's a lot of overlap, but each one of those players that we chose is completely an individual.
Definitely.
So even though we may have chosen some of the same player, different solos by the same player, there's even in our choices, there are things that's the same, but again, there are some things that are completely germane to that one situation. And that's another point. While I was going through this, I was thinking about so much of our playing, especially as jazz improvisers, because it's music of the moment. What happens around us has such a huge role to play in what comes out of us.
Very true. Very true. Yeah, I completely agree. And, you know, I was thinking about that, listening to some of these solos again, you know, especially the live ones, because that's when all that magic happens that may not have happened in the studio. And we can relate to that because we know what that feeling is like, being on a stage in front of a live audience and the drummer, you know, does his thing and we have to react, or maybe vice versa. Maybe we do our thing and the drummer reacts and pushes us, you know. Yeah. Those kind of things I think are really cool, and it's cool to hear these legends in that element and doing what they're doing. What are we're kind of holding off for a while, but I think it's important to talk this to set the stage, as it were.
Yeah.
What are a few elements that you look for as far as a great solo? A great trumpet solo, let's be specific, a great trumpet solo. What are the few things that stand out?
Well, a few things that stand out to me, it's not, I mean, the question you asked is very specific, but my answer may not be as specific. What makes a great trumpet solo to me is what makes a great solo in general.
Yeah.
Or just what makes great music, even in general. When I listen to trumpet soloists or jazz musicians in general, I want to hear something that relays what I know of as the core of jazz music. A high degree of an individual, you know, we talked about individuals before, but an individualized approach to improvisation, a feeling of the blues, that is central to the core of this music. So in order to be what I listen for in a great trumpet solo, it has to have that. Yeah. And also, it has to have, talking about feeling, it has to swing. Whether it's the you know, 2 and 4, that swing, what we think of as the swing groove, or a Latin tune, or whatever it is, it has to have that rhythmic propulsion, I guess you would call it, that makes the music feel good.
That's great, man. That's a great answer. And you know what I think is interesting is that you didn't say anything about technique, and I think that's important because I think a lot of times we get caught up, especially as trumpet players, you know, saxophone player. I mean, we're all guilty. We kind of talk more about technique, you know, the technical aspects of someone's solo, rather than everything that you named, which I think, and I think we can both agree, are the most important elements. Technique and playing, you know, 1,000,000 notes an hour is really impressive. And some of the people on our list and some of the solos did that. But I think that's really cool that you didn't mention that as one of the main aspects of a great trumpet solo, because that's kind of, I think, an afterthought. That's kind of like an additional spice on top of it, you know. But the things that you mentioned, swing and that blues feel and the sound, the individuality, those things I think are the most important for these great solos.
Yeah. And I'm interested, is there anything else that you would add that you would look for, James?
I don't think so, man. As you were saying the list, I was agreeing. So, I mean, I couldn't come up with anything else. So we're in total agreement on that. All right, so let's get to these lists. Talk about your list. Talk about how you put it together. Talk about how many people and all that stuff.
Well, like I said a little bit earlier, these are solos that kind of I came across, or that I was directed to as I was in my formative years, just developing my particular approach to wanting to be a jazz musician and how to develop that. So a lot of these solos are solos that I not only learned a lot from, they became a part of the style that I present as a player now. And one of the things that all of these solos would have, as I mentioned before, the swing is the key. They all have that feeling of moving forward or propelling forward in some way. Yep. Even though some players play, and this is the oxymoron which jazz is full of. Some players play behind the beat, but it still swings because you feel like you're going somewhere.
Yep, definitely.
So that and all of the solos that I chose as well, there are a few things that we'll talk about, some commonalities. Mm-hmm. They're all highly melodic. One of the things I think, one of the things I look for in when I listen to music, I look for highly melodic things that I can walk away singing or humming after I listen to it, something that stays there. I think that's an important thing. We kind of covered that in the last session that we did on why listening is important. Yeah. But these solos have lots of elements that I know I did, and maybe once some of you listen to them, you'll feel the same way. There's some things that stick with you that immediately you want to sing or hum. Mm-hmm. And for instance, one of the solos that I chose was the first solo I was led towards to transcribe or to learn. And that's Miles's solo on Freddie Freeloader from Kinda Blue. I know you chose one from Kinda Blue also, which is a huge influence on every trumpet player and just about every jazz musician in the world. Yeah. But Freddie Freeloader, the reason that was brought to me was it was an example of the blues. That's one of the primary things, talking about the blues, one of the primary ways we learn to play is by learning to play on the blues or learning to play the blues. Freddie Freeloader is a great example of a nice, swinging, relaxed blues. And Miles, when he plays on it, he plays that exact same way. One of the things that I was that struck me in that particular solo, Miles, when I listened to that, there was a sense of architecture going on with that solo. He was building something and it was going somewhere. I give you an example. The first three notes that he chose in that solo was it's in concert B flat. So he played the concert B flat, ta, 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 three of them. At the very end of the solo, like 3 or 4 choruses later, he ended with 3 concert B flats
Mm.
in a different rhythm, but there were 3 da 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 nonetheless. And again, listening to that whole solo, like I said, there was a sense of, you could hear Miles building a structure in that solo. So that was one of the main things that that stuck with me through that particular solo. And he played, I believe it was 4 choruses. The choruses built slowly over time. The first chorus is basically, it's like a good story. You know, you have the introduction, you introduce your characters and what the plot is all about. And then you kind of build on that. In the second chorus, he built a little bit. He sort of stressed a little bit with the range of what he was playing, mm-hmm. and the length of or the amount of notes, let's say, he was playing. And the third chorus did that same thing. In the last chorus, he got to the highest, he played the highest note that he plays in that whole solo right at the beginning, or close to the beginning of that 4th chorus. So again, like I said, there was that sense that you could feel that architectural sense of him building that solo. So that solo to me is like the primo. I went, as a teacher, I usually start students that I work with on that solo as well.
That's great. It's an amazing solo. The whole album is amazing, but yes, that specifically, you know, a blues, which, you know, the form is so easy mm-hmm. in parentheses, but it's so basic and so common. Everyone plays the blues, whether you're a jazz musician or not. But Miles found this way to, like you said, build something. And it wasn't a classic bluesy solo. I don't think he ever played really bluesy, like maybe a Clark Terry or Sweets Edison, or, you know, those cats. He had a different way of playing on top of a blues. And the form you're talking about, I don't know if you think about this at all, but I talk to students about this, is that the golden ratio, and that whole theory that, you know, the whole theory that the best solos kind of do that, they arc, and then they come down at the end, right? So there's this hump in the middle where they're elevated, they're doing their thing, and then all of a sudden they drop off. And we can find that in nature. We can find that in the great classical pieces. They have that same ratio. And when you were explaining his solo, you were exactly explaining that same kind of ratio, that you know, from beginning to end, that there's, and I talk to students about that, you know, like, because sometimes we have students that play great notes and great ideas, but it just is flat and doesn't do anything. It doesn't go anywhere. So I talk a lot about that. Those great solos, like you said, they go up and then come down. And I think it's really important.
What's a solo that sort of does that with you, that's the primary solo for you?
Well, I mean, I don't know how I'm going to do this, because now that we're talking about Miles, I want to keep talking about Miles, and I got the Miles T-shirt on too, you know. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to stick with this. So we're going to go out of order, but, you know, whatever. It's impossible to put number 1, number 2, and, you know. One of the solos on my list is Miles live at the Black Hawk, and him playing Bye Bye Blackbird. And this is with one of his classic quintets with Paul Chambers and Jimmy Cobb, and Wynton Kelly and Hank Mobley. And these were 2 nights, Friday and Saturday night, live at the Black Hawk in San Francisco in 1961.
Not to cut you off, something interesting here. That rhythm section is the exact same rhythm section on that Freddie Freeloader cut. And I think that plays a big role in what comes out of Miles.
I completely agree. And the fact that he who was, you know, everyone knows that he was temperamental, and wasn't happy with certain cats and he would change his band around here and there. But that band lasted for a long time.
Yeah.
We can hear why it lasted for so long, because they knew how to support him, and he was comfortable. He could do what he wanted. And I think for me, that is my favorite band, Miles' band, because it just, everything fits together. They're all listening. They're all doing their thing. And a lot of times they're playing standards, but they're doing them in ways that, you know, we would never imagine, even to this day. So they're playing this track is Bye Bye Blackbird, famous, I mean, tune that's been around since, you know, the 30s or 40s, and they're doing it so much justice. I mean, they're recreating this tune, and Miles's solo is the same thing as you were explaining with Freddie Freeloader. It's that same arc, it's that same build, and you know, he's playing with a harmony mute, and little by little, and there's all this blues in it. You know, it's weird because we don't think of Miles as being a bluesy player, but especially on this album, you can hear him playing so much blues. He's just thrown it in wherever he can, all these blues notes, and the band is simmering behind him. Jimmy Cobb is playing that quarter note, you know, behind him, that beat behind him, little by little, and then all of a sudden they start building up and simmering, and it just becomes something incredible. And then of course, you know, the next musician takes over. And you mentioned, you know, the other classic Miles was So What solo. I had to put that on there because, you know, that's what everyone talks about. The best solo ever, I think, jazz solo ever, I think most people would say it was Miles Davis on So What. We kind of get tired of talking about it because that's, you know, it ends up being the only thing we talk about. Yeah. But I think it's important to put on the list just to remind ourselves how beautiful and how well thought out that solo is. You know, this was, we talk about it as if it was all thought out, but it wasn't thought out. It was, you know, it was improvised, but I do think that he did have an idea of what kind of message he wanted to convey, what kind of attitude and ambiance he wanted to convey. And this was the beginning of a new kind of era, you know, the modal kind of sound, which wasn't really prevalent before that. So he was experimenting and showing off pretty much what the possibilities that could be done with modal music. So it's another great solo that obviously I think most of us know about.
Yeah, and well, before we wrap up with Miles, there was another Miles solo that I chose as well. It's Oleo. It's from Relaxing with Miles, that series of records that he recorded before he left Prestige. And it's with Sonny Rollins, who was the composer of Oleo. Sonny Rollins plays all of what Sonny is. He plays a lot of that, you know, with that fire, and there's a lot of notes, a lot of rhythms coming at you. Miles on this solo, though, he uses so much space. Yeah, like the beginning, the A section, the first A section, I started counting it, and he plays like a total of like 6 notes the entire A section. I mean, he's just a lot of space. But while he was playing in that space, he was playing really melodically. It's almost like he was playing some songs that a child would sing, like the children's nursery rhymes. What wasn't that simple, but it was like that, especially comparative with all of the fast tempo and, you know, all that was going on. It was really simple, and it just used a lot of space in between. So definitely go ahead, somebody listening here, you want to check that out.
Definitely. And I think it's cool that, you know, that on his, you know, his album, his big album, you know, his name is on it, and he has the patience and the maturity to play 6 notes on the first A with all that space. That's hip. I mean, that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talking also about someone that used a lot of space and was very mature, was Louis Armstrong, and he made also. I ended up putting two. I don't know if you saw that. I put two of his tracks on my list. One of them was his solo on Stardust, and this is when he's about 30 years old, which, you know, when he was 30, he was conquering the world pretty much. That was the beginning of the end for he was changing everything for jazz trumpet, and people were listening to his albums and saying, what am I going to do with my life?
Yeah, he was creating everything for jazz trumpet.
Exactly. I mean, and this first one is Stardust, and his timing, you know, it starts off with him playing trumpet, and then he puts the trumpet down and sings, which is just as swinging and hip. But, you know, his timing, his technique, the way he uses his melody, and then all of a sudden he starts double timing, which wasn't that really common back then. You know, all of a sudden it's double time. And I think it's really cool how, you know, the next soloist, who's an alto saxophonist, starts playing after him, and it's complete. You get back to reality. You go back to the level of everyone else. You hear the saxophone player plays great, but he's at nowhere at the same level as Louis Armstrong at that time in 1930. And the other track I put on there, I thought you might get a kick out of this, Dwayne, is that my first jazz trumpet teacher was Max Colley Jr.,
I know Max well. Yeah.
So I was 13 when I started studying with him, and one of the first solos he gave me to learn was, let's see what it is, Weatherbird.
Oh yeah.
Weatherbird. Yeah. And that's a classic solo. Him and Earl Hines on piano. It's just a duo, and they're going back and forth, trading courses, trading eighths, doing this thing, and that's something that you know, Lewis's teacher used to do. King Oliver used to play Weatherbird, but at this point in Lewis's life, he took over and he recreated something different. His swing was different. It was more laid back. He was taking more chances rhythmically and harmonically, and I think it's so cool how he played back then.
You know, one thing about Louis Armstrong that a lot of people may not realize, Louis played and he sang as well, but he played as he sang.
Yeah.
Or vice versa, sang as he played. But one of the things I heard recently, Louis studied and he considered himself a vocalist first. I don't know if you knew, when he was younger, in his younger days, he used to sing in a vocal quartet.
I didn't know that.
And, yeah, and that's one of the things that kind of influenced his development as a trumpet player.
Wow. And for those of you who don't know, Steve mentioned this, but again, Dwayne is from New Orleans, the same place where Louis Armstrong is from. So it's a great connection, and I'm sure you got a lot of secret stories that you need to let us all know about.
They'll remain secret.
All right. Let's talk more about your list. Who else?
You sort of mentioned them when you were talking about something else. Sweets Edison.
Oh yeah.
Sweets Edison is a huge influence on me. The two things I talked about when we were talking about things I look for in a solo, Sweets had them in spades.
Mm-hmm.
Swing, incredible sense of swing.
Yeah.
I mean, he just plays one note, and you just feel good listening to that one note.
Not many people can do that.
Yeah, right. and the solo that I chose, he does that in a couple of places. Yeah, I mean, you just feel good. It's like, oh, Sweets. And the other thing is the blues. Highly blues inflected player. You know, and people think about the blues. What a way that I heard it explained was blues notes are notes outside of the fundamental harmony that you hear. You know, notes that you would add in outside of that. For example, I got my trumpet here. Right, that's a G triad on the trumpet. Well, a blue note could be that note. That's not the note that's in that harmony. So when you play that note, it sounds it sounds and feels different. So Sweets played a lot of those blues notes and a lot of blues inflection. He when you listen to Sweets, you hear somebody singing. You know, he sounds like he's singing those notes as he plays them.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, hearing you talk about the blues, I think that's where it all came from, you know, and also going back to Louis Armstrong being a singer. I think that's what we are trying to get at and get close to with the blues notes and bending notes and using a plunger and all those effects, right? I think we're trying to get closer to the human voice. Did you know that Sweets was Frank Sinatra's favorite trumpet player?
Oh, absolutely.
And it's not a surprise, because who wouldn't want that solo, you know, in the middle of a song?
Yeah, Frank, when he would go into the studio and he would fly Sweets in just to have Sweets. And Sweets wouldn't play in the section. He'd just play the solo who's behind him, you know.
That's awesome. Of course. And that's why they call him Sweets.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Didn't call him Sweets for nothing.
No. All right, so let's go to other players. For instance, I have Freddie Hubbard twice on my list. One of them I couldn't find. That was one of those live versions that I couldn't find. But if you can, on YouTube, check out Freddie Hubbard and who is it? All right, Freddie Hubbard live at the Left Bank. It's this random live concert in Baltimore at this place, at the Left Bank, and it's just, I mean, it's a pickup rhythm section, and it's just fire. The whole night is just nonstop, incredible. I mean, the audience is going crazy. You can almost put yourself there. You feel like you're there. It's incredible. And the solo on that is a blues, and the way he starts the blues is like how you were talking about, melody and swing and blues. I mean, that, like, those three elements happen all at once, and that's how he starts his solo. Freddie is one of those cats who doesn't, you know, sometimes there are soloists that they start fiery and they end fiery. But Freddie had that way of starting slow and soft, so you kind of forget about his fieriness, and then all of a sudden he surprises you and wakes you up, you know, in the middle of the solo. Yeah. So that's one of them. Another solo is the classic live version of Ugetsu from the album Ugetsu, Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. And I mean, he does the same thing on that. There's all this melody, there's all this rhythm, and he's really playing with the rhythm section, not on top of them.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Freddie is he is one of those players, like you said, fire comes immediately to mind when you think of Freddie Hubbard.
Yeah.
But he has that bluesy quality about him too, that earthy quality about his playing while he's playing all of that fire.
Yeah.
You know, that's hard to pull off. There's another player on the list that I chose. He's not talked about nearly as much as I think he should be, and that's Fats Navarro.
Yeah.
The solo that I chose is it's him. He was playing with Tad Dameron's band, and he was playing a Tad tune called "Our Delight." Fats only plays one chorus, one solo chorus, and in that chorus, you hear all sorts of things. All of these things that we're talking about, the blues he playing. One of the things I love about Fats, he had this big, gorgeous tone. He could be playing a lot of notes or fast notes, but that tone still sang through all of them.
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned Freddie, playing a lot of rhythmic things, and along with the rhythm section, Fats did exactly that on the solo as well.
Yeah, that was the one that I was so happily surprised that you put on the list, because he's one of those cats. I have that album. I've listened to that album so many times, but it's been so long since I've listened to it that when I saw that you put that on the list, I was so happy. Now I got to go back and dive back into it, because and it's funny, now in retrospective, I can listen to it and think about Dizzy Gillespie or Clifford Brown and all the guys that came out of Fats Navarro. He died young. He was one of those tragic figures in jazz history that died young, but he influenced so many trumpet players. So it's good to go back now and listen and be like, oh yeah, that's Dizzy played that. He got that from Fats, or Clifford got that from Fats.
Actually, I think that was the other way around.
Oh,
Fats got that from Dizzy. There's a story of, I think it was the Metronome All-Stars. The trumpet section was Dizzy Gillespie. It was one of those all-star kind of things. It was Dizzy Gillespie, Fats Navarro, and Miles Davis. They played a song, I think the song's called Overtime. And Miles and Fats, they were lovers of Dizzy. Miles was definitely a student of Dizzy's, as well as Fats. And the joke was they got together and wanted to play exactly like Dizzy. So as hard as that is, or as impossible as that is, really, when you listen to that track, unless you know them, and unless you know them as individuals, you listen to all three trumpet players sound very much alike. And that's I think a huge debt of gratitude to Dizzy, because again, he was that person that influenced, both of them. And through that, Fats Navarro influenced, a whole group. Clifford Brown was a big Fats Navarro follower of Fats Navarro. So there's it's interesting when you look at the trumpet lineage and how that all branches out.
Definitely. And let's keep going with the lineage. So from Clifford Brown, we go to Lee Morgan, right? Lee Morgan studied.
Well, let's stop on Clifford Brown a minute. Let's stop on Clifford Brown a minute, because I got two Clifford Brown solos on my list. One of them is Joy Spring. That was his famous, great tune. Joy Spring, for those of you who played it, there's a lot of notes in the melody, a lot of chords to play through. One of the things I love about Clifford's solo, Clifford plays through all of those chord changes in a highly melodic way. Again, you can sing through his solo. You can walk away singing those once you listen to it a few times. And I think that was a big, a big deal to be able to do, to play a song that has like changes every couple of bars, to play a coherent melodic solo through that whole thing. That says a lot. And Clifford Brown absolutely did that. Yeah. That's a solo that, one of those solos when I was coming along, people said, hey, you should check that out. And I did.
We all did. Yeah.
And the other Clifford Brown was Cherokee. That was, my parents were not musicians, but they had a huge record collection. And it was mostly jazz and R&B and those things. But I found this Clifford Brown recording. It was something that was put out on 33. And Cherokee was the first tune on there. And I listened to that and I was like, whoa. somebody could actually do that.
Yeah.
So I had to include that on this list as well.
Yeah, those are both great classic recordings, and his solo is, I mean, his solos were always just so perfectly put together, and just, and as you said, so musical and so melodic. With all that technique, I think it would be easier to rely on the technical side, but he also kept in mind the musical and the melodic side, and that's what makes him one of the great players.
Absolutely.
All right, so Lee Morgan is on my list, who was, who studied with Clifford, and one of them is, we know that classic Art Blakey and Jazz Messengers version of Moanin', but one of my favorite versions is Live in Paris, and I had to do some searching because it was under a different name, but this is Live in Paris, and I have him playing on Moanin' and him playing on Blues March. And Lee Morgan on both solos, he's one of those guys you can rely on as being the same every time. You know he's going to be smooth and funky, and he's going to be rhythmic. All of a sudden you hear triple tongue and double tongue. You hear half valves. He squeezes notes out. He gets bluesy. He takes his time. He works the crowd. And this is a live audience that's really live. Like they're listening, they're dancing. You can tell, like they're shouting back at every note he plays, and he's milking it. And I love that kind of soloing because it just shows how important music is as far as an interaction with a live audience.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a conversation between both parties.
And I think Lee was always up for that. Like I think maybe other players kind of stuck to their same old thing, whether they're in the studio or they're in the live audience, they do their thing. Whether, maybe Miles is an example of that. It didn't matter if the audience was going crazy or whatever, he's going to still do his Miles thing. But Lee Morgan, I think, would tear it up if he heard someone scream, yeah, like he would change gears and just like, tear it up. So those two versions of Blues March and Moanin' Live in Paris, I thought were incredible solos.
Yeah, that's Lee, as putting this list together, there's only so much that we could put in. And there were a couple of Lee solos. As a matter of fact, on the trumpet listening list that I did before, there's a couple of Lee Morgan solos. His solo on, okay, now I'm drawing a blank. Speedball. The blues, yeah. That is a fantastic solo, and I thought about including that here as well, but it's on that other one.
Yeah. Hey, at least go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
one of the things that I thought about with Lee, again, like I mentioned with Freddie, he had that earthy quality about him as well. You kind of mentioned, he would play the blues and, he would speak to you almost.
Yeah. I think there at one point early in, if you listen to Introducing Lee Morgan, he sounds a lot like, like his predecessor. He sounds, like Clifford Brown or those cats, or even a little bit of Dizzy Gillespie, but eventually he started being more sassy and just not caring, just like letting it all loose, letting it all hanging out, which I think the other guys didn't do as much. So it's really cool.
From what I heard, that was Lee that was his personality, him as a person. So talking about improvisation, I think that's what happens. Who we are comes out in what we play as well.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so I did see that we both had a modern trumpet player on the list.
Yeah, some guy named Marcellus, something or other.
One of the Marcellus brothers.
Yeah. Yeah, Winton, you know, it's interesting. In our last session, I kind of picked up I already knew it, but Winton played a huge role in you becoming a trumpet player, you know, at you wanting to be a trumpet player. He did with me as well.
Yeah, he changed everything. He changed the game. And especially, you know, everything he's done and has been doing for younger musicians, I think has helped out a lot as well.
Absolutely.
So my choice for him solo, it's one of those classic ones that I listened to when I was 13 years old every day, and I haven't stopped listening to. It's When It's Sleepy Time Down South. Mm-hmm. That's from his volume Standard Time Volume 2. Yeah. And and those are, I mean, it's all these classic jazz standards, but he does it so nice. And the thing is, man, it's so weird because after hearing that album, I expected every jazz album to sound like that because it was just so comfortable, so happy, so, you know, swinging and simple, but yet complex. And so it's still in my mind is one of those classic all-time jazz albums that it's hard to touch because, you know, it has everything, it has all the bases covered. Yeah,
definitely. I would agree with that. You know, actually all of those Standard Time recordings, that the first few, I think all of those happened at a time where Winton was kind of changing as a player. He started going back, researching, you know, more of the like Louis Armstrong. He really got dug into Louis Armstrong's music about that time, which is really shows up on Standard Time Volume 2.
So if anything, he was holding back. He was trying to make more music and make more melodies rather than all the stuff he was doing with Art Blakey, for instance, a few years before he recorded, where he was just, you know, playing all the notes.
Right.
Yeah. What did you choose from Winton?
My Winton selection is sort of Winton playing all of the notes. It's solo on Cherokee. And one of the reasons I added that Winton's version of Cherokee and Clifford Brown's version of Cherokee, there's a lot of similarities. It's a good study in comparison contrast. Winton, one of the things that Winton does on this, he doesn't play the melody at all. He just comes right in improvising. And this version is live. It's live at the Village Vanguard. And of course, the Village Vanguard is one of those places, when you play there, you have to come with your A game. Or else you don't want to show up.
Exactly.
And he absolutely did that. I mean, you can hear like the history of jazz trumpet in his solo. He plays like 6 or 7 choruses, and there's a lot of that fire, like of Freddie Hubbard. There's a lot of that bluesy playing. There's a lot of the melodic playing. One of the things that I want to point out about this too is none of the solos and things that we do, I kind of mentioned this a little earlier, they usually come as a result of the surroundings that we're in and the people that we're around. And James, you mentioned this, the drummer could do something and we'll play this way or vice versa. That is really obvious in this particular recording of Cherokee. The band that he had there, I believe it was Marcus Roberts on piano, Reginald Veal on bass, and Herlin Riley on drums. But they play, the interaction between all of those musicians was phenomenal. And Winton was sort of riding the wave in that. You could hear a lot of, like Herlin would play something on the drums and you can hear Winton respond, oh yeah, we'll take this out.
Yep.
You know, it's like they were having a conversation back and forth.
And the way he starts this solo is it's stop time, right? The whole thing starts stop.
Yeah.
And then little by little they start coming in one by one, and then it becomes this whole thing.
Not this one. I know the one you're talking about.
Okay.
This one just starts with him solo.
Okay.
And the rhythm section comes in a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah, he just.
So his rhythm is on. It has to be on. It has to be locked in, as it always is. And yeah. I mean that whole. I remember when that whole series came out. That was like a whole week, right? Every night they were recording at the Vanguard.
Yeah, well, they put it together in the CD to sort of mimic what would be a week of live at the Village Vanguard. But what actually happened is that was actually taken from a couple of years of gigs at the Village Vanguard, and they put it together in that 7 CD film format.
You kidding me, man? This whole time I've been lied to.
Yeah, man. Hey, well, I'm sorry to be the one to break it to you.
That's all right. I still love it. I still love all those. Yeah, that's definitely recommended listening. Listen to all of those. That collection of all those discs. Wynton Septet, right? Live at the Vanguard.
Yeah, Septet.
Septet. Yeah, it's beautiful.
And it's actually 3 different groups on there as well.
Mm.
I believe that Cherokee version, I think, is Marcus Roberts, but Eric Reed plays piano on a lot of it as well.
That's right.
That was around that time Wynn's band was transitioning from Marcus Roberts to Eric Reed, basically.
Eric Reed. Yep. And then you have Wycliffe Gordon and Victor Goins and all those other cats, right?
Yeah, that was another transition. The tenor chair started with Ty Williams and then went to Victor Goins.
That's right. Very cool. All right, are there any questions out there? If not, Steve, how are we looking?
Man, I am enjoying this. I don't.
I am too.
We can go on for another couple of hours.
Cool. Let's just go ahead and cancel Austin. Just kidding, Austin. Austin's here.
Sorry, Austin.
Austin's awesome, and he's going to have a great session after this. We're seated pretty good. It's about 2 minutes before 4 o'clock. Austin goes on at 4:30. So we have a little bit of time if you guys are having fun and want to keep talking. So I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, let's keep going. You cut us off when we need to cut off.
Okay.
So what about the extra soloists that didn't make this short cut? Are there any other great solos or great versions that you want to talk about?
Well, I talked about a couple of them already, but the Lee Morgan, the Speedball, and his big hit, the Sidewinder.
Yeah,
it's a big one as well.
What about Lee Morgan on Blue Train?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That is the fiery young Lee.
Yeah, exactly.
He was 19, I think, when he recorded that.
I think he was. And you know what's funny, man? Going back, it's crazy listening to these solo. I probably listened to Blue Train the first time when I was about 15 years old. Mm-hmm. And going back now, listening to it, I hear specific things that I didn't hear back then. Like, for instance, I hear him playing the same licks over and over again. But the way he plays them and where he plays them, you don't care because it all sounds so hip. He knows how to do it.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Lee is, he definitely was highly individual again. And there were some things that he would pull out of his back pocket. And, some of the Lee licks, I guess you can call them.
Yeah.
I actually went to college with somebody who was hugely into Lee Morgan. His name's I don't know if you know Whitney Russell.
No.
Whitney Russell, actually, he's from Dallas. He and Roy Hargrove went to school together, high school together.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But Whitney used to pull out all of the Lee things. I mean, he absorbed everything Lee Morgan pretty much did. And when listening to Whitney play, I heard a lot of those same licks that Lee would use. And again, because Lee played them, because they were his, he would use them in different ways. And listening to Lee's recordings, you hear a lot of them coming, back from recording to recording, a lot of the same thing.
Yeah. I don't know if you ever heard this story, but I heard, when Lee Morgan he became Lee Morgan by playing with Dizzy Gillespie and his big band. That's how he kind of got his name out there. Dizzy Gillespie was, of course, generous and said, now introducing the young star, Lee Morgan, So there was one night that they were booked to play at Birdland, and Dizzy was showing up late. And the owner of Birdland was notorious for docking pay if you show up late. Like he wouldn't care. At drop of a dime, he'd dock your pay. So Dizzy was showing up late, and the big band knew that they had to start anyways. So they started playing a tune, and Dizzy, snuck in little, the back way so no one would see him. And Lee Morgan got up on the microphone and said, "And now, the great Dizzy Gillespie," calling him out. And Dizzy, was offended. He was pissed off, but he said, okay. He got up to the mic and he said, "All right, thank you. I'm sorry I'm late. Now we're going to play Night in Tunisia." And he counted it off, and he asked Lee Morgan to come up and play. So, that's kind of how he got his fame, was playing great solo on Night in Tunisia. Yeah. So he got up and played one chorus, and Dizzy did this. He played two choruses, and he was starting to get tired because he threw everything out there, all that fire, all that magic. Yeah. Dizzy did this, 3 choruses, kept going, and then by that time, Lee Morgan's lips were just falling off his face. He was so tired. And at that point, Lee Morgan realized he would never do that again to the great Dizzy Gillespie. He learned his lesson.
It's funny. There's stories like that throughout the history where a younger player did something to sort of embarrass the older player, and the older player would be like, "Okay, well, I can deal with that," and would do something to get back at them. And it's like, okay, don't do that again.
Yeah, and the thing is, no one knew except the two of them. They knew.
Right. We were talking about some of the players that didn't make the cut for the list that we have here. One of my huge, I'm a huge fanatic of the trumpet playing of Terrence Blanchard. There's a couple of Terrence Blanchards. There's a recording that he did called Romantic Defiance. I don't know if you've hit to that one.
Yeah, definitely, yes.
He played some things on that. It's like, they're absolutely gorgeous. Yeah. I mean, he plays with a sound that you can sort of bathe yourself in.
Yeah.
And he has that incredible vocal quality as well. That's the thing I love about Terrence. He plays as if he's singing as well.
Yep. And, I love his plan, and I love his especially, like, he's done a lot of movie scores, and he knows how to bring music into a movie and shape the movie musically. And of course we can go to Mo Better Blues, which is an awesome soundtrack. And actually, Wynton is on one of those cuts, even though his name doesn't appear on it, because I guess there was some
burnout tune.
I guess there was some struggle between him and Spike Lee, right?
Yeah, that's what I heard. But that's not hard to believe, though.
Yeah, I know.
Spike Lee.
Well, you mentioned before Harry Sweets Edison, and we talked about him playing with the Count Basie band and him being Frank Sinatra's favorite trumpet soloist. I think, and you might agree, I'm sure you do, that, you know, playing in a big band and then all of a sudden you have 16 measures to play a solo. It's really difficult because, you know, what I want to say is, no, give me as much time as I want so I can build up my solo and, you know, make it my own. But no, you have 16, or not even that. You have 8 measures to make a beautiful solo happen in the middle of this, you know, amazing, whoever wrote it, composition or arrangement, you know. So there, I think that has to be talked about as well. You know, all the great big band soloists, trumpet soloists that, like Harry Sweets Edison, that all of a sudden played this beautiful solo in the middle of this awesome composition that helped it become a memorable recording.
Right. I think that's one of the things that made soloists like Sweets that big band experience, because you have to get right to the heart of the matter.
Yep.
You can't waste time fumbling around. You know, if you have 8 measures to make your statement, you better make sure you say exactly what you want to say, the way you want to say it in those 8 measures.
Exactly, and it has to be within the style, within the whatever, you know, like you can't just play your awesome licks for 8 measures and expect that to be good enough, you know. It has to deal with the song and with the idea of the arrangement.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's the one thing about all of these solos that we're talking about in general, and I kind of mentioned this before, they don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in the context of all of the things that's surrounding them at that particular time. So being able to negotiate that fact, okay, I have this to deal with, and in the big band setting, that makes it even more important to do that. I have this to deal with, but I only have 8 measures to say it.
Yep. Have you heard the rumor that Clifford Brown wrote out his solos before he recorded them?
I've heard that rumor. I don't know if I believe it, but
because for instance, you know, I heard that not too long ago, and it surprised me, and I still don't know if I believe it. But also, you know, when I was touring with the Glenn Miller Orchestra, they said that, you know, back in the day, before they were record, those solos, I mean, everyone in the band could sing the trumpet solo before he actually recorded it, because he was practicing, he was getting it ready for that recording date. Show up at the recording date, he'd play it, because they didn't have time or money to waste. He'd play it exactly the way he's been doing it for all these nights beforehand. So that was the only thing that made me think that maybe it might be true, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think in the big band era, that happened a lot, because there's a story of Ray Nance doing the same thing. You think about Ray Nance, when he played his solo on Take the A Train, Ray Nance would play the same solo from gig to gig a lot of times. So, you know, I think that was what may have been not a necessity, but may have been one of the things that was an expectation, because you go to another gig, they would expect to want to hear you play the same thing that they heard on the record.
Exactly. For the dancers, the swing dancers, and the listeners that hear the big band, your solo is, for them, just another part of the tune that they've been listening to all these years. So they want to hear the exact same thing. They don't want to hear you improvise and do something different.
Right. But Clifford though, I'm sure you've heard those practice tapes of him.
Yeah, definitely
practicing. Yep. To me, listening to those practice tapes, that is what made Clifford Brown. You know, not necessarily. Maybe during the big band era, he may have written out the solos that way, but got to the point where he put in the time in the woodshed.
That's true. That's very true.
That's what made Clifford Brown.
Yep. Very true.
Yeah.
Are there any questions out there?
I have a question for you, James.
Uh-oh.
Any trumpet players that didn't make your list?
I mean, there's a lot that, you know, like Kenny Dorham and Blue Mitchell, Clark Terry and Chet Baker, all those guys I love, and I love almost all their solos. But to pick one specific solo is more difficult. It's hard to find an iconic solo that I can sing and point out specific things, you know, just like we did with the rest on the list. So I mean, those, you know, I could go on and on about each of those guys, but I think it was harder for me to put them on the list because it was harder for me to find a specific solo that was so iconic. Yeah.
I know what you mean. All of those players are players I love as well. I actually thought of putting KD solo on there. Solo he did when he was with Joe Henderson on Punjab.
Oh yeah.
I love that tune.
Yeah.
And he plays a killing solo, but again, it's not the one that you would normally think of. You'll walk away singing.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I love KD with Joe Henderson because he was playing different there. You know, I usually think of Kenny Dorham as a soloist, as him with his own group. You know, Blue Kenny or you know, those albums where it's him in a quartet. But when he's playing with Joe Henderson, it's almost like this whole other thing. He's experimenting. He's pushing himself. He's being pushed almost to try different things.
I think that's true because it's Joe Henderson. I mean, that was Joe Henderson as a player. He was always pushing limits. You know, I mean, Joe had this great vocabulary to pull from, and I think, you know, Kenny sort of had to. He had sort of had to do that to fit in that group.
Quiet Kenny, not Blue Kenny. Quiet Kenny is the album I was thinking of, but I think it's interesting that someone like Joe Henderson wouldn't choose someone like Freddie Hubbard to play on Punjab. You know, he chose someone like Kenny Dorham and kind of pushed him. It was almost like what Bird did with Miles and Red Rodney and Chet Baker. You know, like he kind of pushed them to be the next, you know, Dizzy Gillespie, or to kind of step up to that role. It's very interesting.
That it is.
All right, so I can listen to you guys talk forever. We're probably getting to that point. We need to break because we got another session following you, but can't tell you how much I enjoyed listening to the two of you talk about what you love. And, you know, if you would like to listen or watch more of Dwayne and James, check out the trumpet section in the studio. There's a lot of really great topics that have already been covered, including basic trumpet fundamentals, developing your own sound, improving your technique, using melody and improvisation, why listening to music is important, using scales for ideas, mute technique, different approaches to swing, and more. And no doubt both Dwayne and James, either together or separately, will be back with us in future sessions, helping to build this wonderful archive of information for everybody. We've got some wonderful upcoming sessions as well that are on the education and outreach page. The Zoom information to join each of those free sessions are there as well. Austin Vickery is going to join us in about 15 minutes with a really great session on how to incorporate bebop into your improvisation. Austin does a phenomenal job and also always has really great session materials, which are accessible from that page as well. Valerie Gillespie and Steve Boyson are joining us for their first session tomorrow, Wednesday, July 22nd, Communication Among Band Members, which is going to be great. And Pete Carney is going to continue with his Safer at Home practice series. Jeremy Carter's back with us soon. We've got a jazz vocalist, Michelle Mayo, who's on the faculty at Valencia College and Rollins College, doing a building blocks to scat singing session coming up soon. So just check out the education and outreach page. I'm so excited to keep building this wonderful archive. And if you're into listening to music, remember you can listen to these sessions on the Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions podcast, wherever you stream your podcasts, which is presented by our friends at Marine Max. So I'm going to turn it back just to James and Dwayne to kind of take us out. But big thanks to you guys. Thanks for making these sessions so special.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks to all of you at Clearwater Jazz for having us and for keeping this going, and especially during these crazy times. And as you just said, you know, I think the most important thing, even if you don't listen to us talk, check out the playlists that we put together. Those are kind of our, you know, dream lists of songs and musicians that we love and we think you should love as well.
Amen. Thank you so much, Steve. It's always a pleasure being here, and we appreciate all the Clearwater Jazz Holiday is doing to move music and education forward during this time. So thanks a lot.
Thank you both. Means a lot too. Everybody stay safe out there, be well, and keep playing. We'll see you soon.